Well, good afternoon, viewers. Today we have a 2016 Buick Envision, and it's here because the money light is on. And there's a message of reduced engine power. So you can see the check engine light over on the right. And there was a message, engine power is reduced. It was just dropped off a few minutes ago. So we're going to scan it and see what codes it has to offer. Not very warm in this car, considering they drove it. Let's get the scanner set up. So the customer has some kind of OBD2 dongle in here, plugged in here. Unless this is for, oh, this is an insurance dongle. Yeah, I don't like those things. So the scanner's detected it as a 2016 Buick Envision Premium. So it's got 84,763 kilometers. Let's do a code scan. I've got the car running. That shouldn't be a problem. Network code scan. Fuel trim system rich. I wonder if it's got gas in the crankcase. Engine oil pressure control solenoid valve stuck on. That's not a good code. This has a variable displacement oil pump. But then if the crankcase is full of gasoline, keyless entry, transmitter, battery low, left front tire pressure sensors. Nothing critical. So in the engine control computer, we have a running rich code, P0172. Are we finished this report? Yes, we are. So I'm going to look around in here. So I'm going to have a look at some fuel trim data to see if it's actually subtracting fuel from the fuel trim right now. Short-term fuel trim -10. No, long-term is -10. So I wonder if they changed the oil, because it's not really that bad right now. Short term is ±1 or 2, and long term is -3. I'm going to check the engine oil level. So I'm looking at fuel rail pressure at 360 psi and the low pressure fuel pressure at 59. I'm going to shut the ignition off and I'm going to watch the fuel pressures to see if they decay. I haven't checked the engine oil yet because I wanted to do this. So I'm turning the ignition off. And back on. So if the high pressure pump is leaking, the fuel pressure will begin to decay. Or if any of the injectors are leaking, the fuel pressure begin to decay, and as you can see, it's climbing. And the reason for it climbing is because the fuel has stopped moving and the engine is going through a hot soak. So we'll pick up in a few minutes after this is stabilized, and meanwhile I'm going to check the engine oil. So it's up to 536 psi and 82 psi on the low pressure side. I had to long press the ignition. Now checking the engine oil, and it's up to here on the dipstick, which is about 1.25 inches above the full mark. It's pretty thin. So I'm going to see if there's any TSBs on this. I'm not completely convinced that that high pressure pump isn't leaking, because it's reached 580 psi and it's kind of flat lined, and normally it would go up higher than that, in my opinion. I've done this before on other GDI vehicles and they go well over 1,000 psi. I shut the key off, so we lost communication. But I'm going to check for TSBs. So here's a bulletin, TSB 18-NA-246 Malfunction indicator lamp on, illuminated, P0172, North American vehicles only. Let's see what it says. An engine unique number, because we're going to get the engine unique number. Some technicians may find it DTC P0170 fuel set in the engine control. Condition may be caused by driving the vehicle in short intervals, allowing excessive fuel to collect in the crankcase. Yeah, blame it on the customer. Never had this problem with port fuel injection. Fuel in the engine oil has been confirmed to be caused by frequent short-stop trip operation. Refer to service procedure below. What are they pointing at? Vehicles built after May 7, 2019 may already have the updated PCV installed. Inspect the engine Julian date by reviewing the engine unique number on the front engine cover. Well, I'll have a look at that. So that identification tag is on the front of the engine. I'm looking at it with a borescope here. So we want to look at that 911521. 911-52186. So the way to decode that engine unique number is the first digit is the plant, and this one's a 9. I don't know what that plant means. The second digit is a shift, in this case shift 1. Mine is the first shift, 91. Then the second two digits, or the third and fourth digit, are the year that the engine was built. And this one's a 15, 9115. And the fifth, sixth, and seventh digits reflect the day of the calendar year. So this one's 218, 218th day of the year. So it says if the engine you're working on was built on or after Julian date 19/127, May 7th, the PCV does not need to be replaced. The new revised PCV is already installed in the camshaft cover. Engines built prior to Julian date 19127 have the old style primary PCV valve installed and will need to be replaced. Continue with the service procedures. So my take is that this one was built in 2015 on the 218th day. I'm just going to double check that. So I confirmed it was built 2015 and 218th day. So this one theoretically needs this for 2016 to 18 model years. So there is the PCV valve. I wonder where that is. So what did they do? Increase the size of the orifice? It's not really a PCV. No, brother. So I'm going to have to get this, remove the cam cover, and refer to camshaft cover replacement. So that's the PCV valve, the new PCV valve and the valve cover seating into the bore. Install the cam cover. Oh, lovely. So that PCV valve is underneath the valve cover in this area here. Got to pull this whole valve cover off, which means taking a bunch of plumbing off. This looks like the fresh air inlet here. Yeah, that appears. I'm going to check the vacuum on the crankcase while it's running, checking it at the dipstick hole here. There's no simple way. And that high pressure pump lived back down here. And I don't know what's involved in replacing that. I'll take this air induction off for sure. Not a fan of turbos, thank you very much. So the tapered cone in the dipstick tube connected to a vacuum gauge, it barely moves the gauge. I'll pull the hose off. You can see it going slightly higher. I'll put it back on. So just note, because when we're going to change this PCV, I want to see if that improves or increases the flow. I think it mentioned something about updating the ECM software too. So I just did a network code clear of 25 controllers. I changed the oil and filter. I'm going to order some parts for this thing. I believe the oil pressure code is related to the fact that it had about 8.5 liters of oil in it. It takes 5.6. So it was overfilled, contaminated with gasoline. It was just like water when I drained it. Good for my waste oil furnace. So though I've cleared the codes, I haven't reset the fuel trim, so I'm going to look for fuel trim reset. Here we go. Fuel trim reset. Put it back to base values. So we'll get some parts ordered up for this thing. See what's involved in taking that valve cover off. It says it's like 2.5 to 3 hours, according to the service bulletin. So I'm just looking at some data here. Short-term fuel trim now is -2 to +3, and the long-term fuel trim is +5 in this block cell that I'm currently in. The post-catalyst O2 sensor is flat-lined at 0.68 volts, and the pre-catalyst lambda sensor is, well, lambda is at anywhere from 0.99 to 1.03, so we're definitely in control. As I said, we're going to order up some parts for this thing and get it back in probably next weekend and put these parts in. And we'll likely do another oil change on it then. We'll see how much oil it accumulates between now and then. So the part number for the PCV valve is 555-96783, which will be a dealer part, I'm sure. Doesn't mention that you have to replace the valve cover gasket. It's probably reusable. And the Envision says camshaft cover removal and install is 2.5 hours. But it also mentions engine control module reprogramming. So it must need to be reprogrammed after that. So I'll have to check to see if there's a updated software for the ECM. Probably because that PCV will flow a little bit more air than it originally did, which would be beneficial. But I think this problem is an inherent issue just because of the engine design, short stop and go trips, winter driving, cold climate. We've had some -30 weather, -35 weather here. And it's just an inherent issue with GDI, especially if people let them idle to warm up. I don't recommend that. As soon as you can drive with the windshield clear, you're better off to drive the vehicle. At least it warms up quicker. Transmission and differentials warm up properly. Oh well. So we got this Buick back in for the PCV valve. There's the part number of the PCV valve. And we're starting to remove the upper valve cover. Disconnect all the coils. We've got the coils got to come out. I'm not sure how these rigid lines come off. I don't know why the GM decided to start using rigid lines. Hopefully this won't be able to turn out of the way. And this shield's got to come off. VVT solenoid's got to be disconnected. We're going to try and leave this induction pipe here because it looks like the valve cover will come up and off over that way, but we'll see. So we're on our way in there. This is the coolant line. It goes down through the valve cover by the looks of it here. So we disconnected it at the back end here and at the front end and the banjo bolt on the turbo. Take the turbo cover off, turbo shield off. There's a shield across the front here that comes off. Now these Houdini clips on these PCV lines are nearly impossible to get off. I took this off at the turbocharger by taking out the banjo bolt, or not the banjo bolt, but the little 6 mil or 7 mil Allen headed screw, and put a plug in there so you don't drop anything in there. We're going to leave. I couldn't get the PCV line off of the air induction system, so we're going to leave it all attached. Take it out with the valve cover. This is insane to do all this just to change a PCV valve. So in the instructions, they tell you not to remove the PCV hoses from the valve cover, that they're serviced with the valve cover. I tried to take this fastener out, and I don't know what type of fastener it is. It's not a Torx, it's not a Allen, it's some other. You must remove both camshaft actuator solenoids. Take note that the black one goes, the one with the black connector goes to the front. And the coolant pipe, you need to pry that up. The coolant return line from the turbo, after you take the banjo bolt off, you need to pry that up out of there. There's going to be an O-ring seal replaced on that. So there's the valve cover off. There is the actual PCV valve right there. Way to go, General Motors. You could have made it accessible from the top. Could have put a service fitting at the top. But no, got to go to all this trouble. But I had intended to reuse this valve cover gasket because I talked to Field Tech and he said they always reuse them. But there's a problem with this gasket here. You can see it's broken. It's the cam timing solenoid. So there's an oil gallery, oil passages in here. We didn't have any cam timing error codes, but we're certainly not going to put it back together like this. This gasket is broken. Now the trouble is getting a gasket set on a Saturday. So this PCV valve just pulls straight out, grab with a pair of pliers, and this small narrow end goes in to the valve cover. There's the new PCV valve, part number. And I did get these gaskets, the valve cover gasket, the two oil control valve gaskets. And looking at these solenoids, although the service literature says to remove them, there's no reason you need to take them out because they don't go into a passage. The passage is in the valve cover, as you can see here. So there's two O-rings, this special O-ring, and the gasket, and these two gaskets. So there's 5 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, 5, 6 pieces altogether. So there's the parts list for the gaskets, in case you're wondering. So there's the new PCV valve installed. The new one is gray and the original one was black. Gaskets installed. Now I see a problem here. This gasket was blown out in this area here. It looks like the casting is broken on this valve cover, because you can see there's, like if there's oil pressure in here, it's going to push against the side of this seal, and there's nothing to keep it from. I looked in the top of the engine and I don't see this missing piece of aluminum, but that had to be like that because I didn't break it. You can see the passage right here. You can actually see the mark right there. So that's interesting. I look down in here with a bore scope and I can't see any aluminum casting. Put a little tiny bit of silicone RTV sealant right here at this spot, and the edge of this seal where it changes direction. And we're ready to put it in. So there it is, all back together again. All the 6 mil bolts, the cam cover bolts, the bracket bolts, the coil bolts are all 89 inch-pounds. The vacuum pump cover bolts are 89 inch-pounds as well. I actually think these were 75, but they're just for brackets. The heat shield, 6 mil bolts, so 89 inch-pounds is probably adequate. So we're ready to start this thing up and run it a bit. I'm going to check the vacuum on the crankcase now, compare it to before. Yeah. Put a new O-ring seal on this coolant pipe. So I didn't bother recording it because the vacuum on this dipstick tube is no different than it was before. I would have liked to have plugged off the fresh air inlet, but you can't get these hoses off. They're one-time use only, molded on there. There is a slight amount of vacuum. If I hold my finger over the dipstick hole for a few seconds and pull it off, you can hear a little puff of air going into the intake. So we're going to fire up SPS, service programming, and see if there's any updated software for the ECM on this thing. So I got a clean battery charger on it, and we're going to set up service programming. To the vehicle. Click next. We'll see if there's an update for the software for the ECM. Engine control module. Let's see if there's any updated software. PSB recommended to make sure that the latest software update was done. Take up one of your VIN slots. New operating software to address P0172, P0223E robustness, and P0315B. The software started production. All right, let's go on. Start programming. Well, isn't that special? You're attempting to reprogram with the same calibration. So it has the latest software in it. Well, we're going to cancel then. So I'm doing a network scan of all the controllers to see if any of the codes had returned. You know, engine's clean, transmission's clean, ABS, airbag. General checksum failure in the amplifier. Well, that's important. Keyless entry battery is weak. And he's got some TPMS sensors that are, he's either got winter tires on or he's got dead sensors in the wheels. Lost communication with liftgate control module. History DTC. And CAN bus communication fault in power steering control module in history. But none of the codes related to running rich or the oil pressure code. I'll be very surprised if the PCV valve update fixes this as per the bulletin. It might be okay now because it's mild outside now. It's like +2, +3 Celsius today. Yesterday was +6. So hopefully spring is on the way. I'm going to look at some engine data here. So I'm just curious if the fuel pressure decays. This is the fuel rail pressure, and the fuel high pressure system, it's 350 psi roughly. And the low pressure fuel is around 57. I'm going to shut it off, but then I'm going to long press the ignition to turn it back on. I might lose communication. Okay, so the engine's not running now. So as you can see, the fuel rail pressure is climbing, and that's because the engine's going through a hot soak. And the fuel in the fuel rail is trapped, so the heat expands it. As I said before at the beginning, if that high pressure fuel pressure decayed, then there's a leak in the system, and it might be leaking fuel from the high pressure pump into the crankcase. Now, I've changed the oil and filter again. I'm going to reset the oil life monitor, give it back to the customer, and have them keep an eye on the fuel or the engine oil level. But that's it for now. I think we'll call this one fixed, hopefully. Yeah, it's rising up, 478. We shut it off, it was 350. Thanks for watching.